Hey guys, so welcome back to the full stack web development part 8. Alright, so in the next couple of videos, we are actually going to learn CSS. Alright, so before we even start CSS, let's look at one single CSS statement. Alright, so this is a paragraph which is being styled to a color of blue. Alright, so this is a CSS selector, this is a CSS property, and this is the value that you can actually assign that property. Alright, and in turn this property gets attached to that CSS selector, and ultimately the HTML tag that is actually selected with the help of this specific CSS selector gets styled. Alright, so now that you actually know all the theory that you need to know about CSS, let's go back to our VS Code and let's actually look at more CSS properties. Alright, so as you can see that I've actually created a new HTML, that is part8.html. And I already have my boilerplate ready with a little bit of my own HTML. Alright, so as you can see that I have actually given a heading as CSS fonts and a title as CSS tutorial. Alright, and you guys are free to choose any title and any heading that you want. Alright, so for now we are actually going to create a new div tag which we are going to give an ID of font styled, and within which we are actually going to write some text. Alright, so here I've actually written as how to style fonts. Alright, so what we are actually going to do is that inside of our head tag, we are actually going to open a style tag. Alright, now I am actually using this specific way of styling because I don't want to attach external CSS right now because I would need to go back and forth. So for the ease of both of us, so that it's also easily visible to you what I'm actually writing in my own CSS, and it's actually right in front of your eyes, so I'm actually using this specific format of styling. Alright, so now that we have actually given an ID to our div, so let's go ahead and attach some styling to it. Alright, so as you can see that inside my style tag, I have actually given a ID, that is with a hashtag. I've defined my CSS selector as an ID inside my HTML. Alright, so the ID is actually going to be the same ID that I've given my div. Alright, so that's font styled. Alright, so now in this, what you can do if you are inside VS Code, you can go ahead and type font, and it would actually give you a lot of recommendations. So these are all the properties that are specific to font. So you can actually style different things that are actually attached to the font. Alright, so you can actually manipulate the size, you can actually manipulate the family, weight, style, etc, etc. Alright, so what we are actually going to do is that we are actually going to start off with font family. So without actually giving you the actual definition of what font family is, why not actually just show you? Alright, so let's go for font family cursive. Alright, and let's just save that and then go ahead to your live server. So now as you can see that this is my h1, alright, the CSS fonts, and below which you can see that this is actually my div in which I have written as how to style fonts. Alright, and as you can see that the font is actually different from the default font, that is the font of our h1. Alright, that's because I've actually given a font family. Alright, the font that is actually going to get applied on the actual text of your div. Alright, so just like in in a Word document, when you select those fonts, like which one do you want to select, Arial, Times New Roman, or anything. Alright, so for us we have actually currently chosen the font as cursive. Alright, so that's why you can actually see a different type of font than the default one. So right now we have actually specified the font with just one single CSS property value. Alright, that is cursive. So what you can actually do is that if you actually go ahead and open up the Visual Studio Code recommendation tab, and within which you can actually see some more fonts. Alright, so these are the web saved fonts. Alright, now there are two types of fonts that are web saved fonts, and the other ones are just called web fonts. Alright, now web saved fonts are actually the fonts that are pre-installed and come with your OS. Alright, so you can actually use them without getting into any errors because they are already installed on your system. So if you actually define them in your CSS, they would actually show up on your web page. But if you actually define a font that is not installed on your OS, you would actually run into some errors because your font styling won't show up because it's actually not installed on that system. Alright, so these are all the fonts that are that would actually appear in 99% of the OSs that are out there. Alright, so what you can do is that go ahead and select any one of those. Alright, so let's go ahead with this one. Alright, so Segoe UI and Tahoma. So previously we were actually using just one value. Alright, so what we have done here is that we are actually using a font stack. Now what is a font stack? So previously we were just using cursive, all right, but what if some other OS out there doesn't have that font cursive? What would happen then? All right, so that's where font stack comes in. All right, so let's say you have actually defined Segoe UI. All right, and let's say some OSs don't have that. So what would happen is that this is actually the preference with which you have actually defined your fonts with. All right, so it would actually prefer Segoe UI at the first preference. All right, so if the OS actually has that, it would only show the font in Segoe UI. But what if that system actually doesn't have that font? So what would happen is that it would actually go on to the next one. So it would choose Tahoma. And if the OS also doesn't have Tahoma, then it would go with Geneva and so on. All right, you get the point. So with this, you can actually define a font stack. All right, and this actually comes really handy when you are actually working with the large scale applications. All right, so now you know how to actually attach a font family, but we only know how to use web safe fonts. All right, so now let's look at how we would actually use any other font that's actually out there. All right, so if you want to use, like, let's say you were actually out on a street, you see a billboard and you are like, damn, that font's awesome, I would actually want to use that font in one of my websites. Well, you can actually go ahead and do that, because if you go ahead onto Google and actually search for Google Fonts, so this is one of the best websites out there to get some different kind of fonts that aren't actually predefined in your OS. All right, so here you can actually see that there are different kinds of fonts that you can actually import. All right, so what I would do is that I would actually want to use this weird kind of font, whatever this is, Cablamo, whatever this is. So let's just import this into our website. Now, how would we import this? Go ahead and click on it. So you would actually be shown this specific font. Then you can go ahead and scroll down below and it would show you that in the various font weights that this font is actually available in. And this one is only available in one font weight, that is regular 400. So what you want to do is that go ahead and there is this plus icon with this specific font which says select regular 400. All right, so go ahead and select that. And this would actually open up a new tab onto your right hand side of the screen, if you can actually see that. So what this would do is that there are two ways to import this. All right, which you can actually see here. So the first one is actually with a link tag that we have actually seen before, with which we actually link our scripts, various kind of external scripts with our HTML. And the other one is actually an @ import. This is actually an import which we use in our CSS file, that is .css file, that is the style sheet that we use externally. All right, so you can also import your fonts by using an @ import, and we would actually see this further on in the tutorials. But right now, as we are only confined to the HTML right now, so we are actually going to use this link tag. So what you can do is that go ahead and copy this link, and what you want to do is go back into your HTML and just paste this in your head. So as you can see that I copied the whole link tags that were provided to me by Google for that specific font, and I've just pasted all the link tags in my head tag. All right. So now what I want to do is that now I want to use this font. So to use this font, you can actually go ahead and scroll down a little bit, and then you would actually see the CSS rules to specify this specific font. And the rule that is specified for this is actually font family, the font name, and then cursive. So they have also provided a font stack. So they are also saying that if the OS doesn't have this font, then you just use cursive. All right. But now that we actually have specified the links for this specific font, we would actually have that font. So let's go ahead and copy that and go on to our CSS and replace this whole font family. So now we have Cablamo and cursive, and this is the whole font stack. So if we don't have Cablamo, we'll just see cursive. All right. So now let's just go ahead and save that and go on to our viewport. And now you can actually see that now I actually have that weird kind of font. All right. And I can also see that it's quite small. So let's go ahead and check out another font property, that is the font size property. All right. So now I actually specified font size as 50 pixels. So now my font is actually going to be 50 pixels big. All right, so now if we go on to our website, so now we can actually see that Cablamo font in its full glory. So you can actually see that we have actually imported an external font from Google Fonts into our own website. All right, and this we have done with the help of some link tags that were actually given to us from Google. And this actually imports all the styles that are actually required to actually style that font. And all you need to do is just give the name of that specific font family And there you go, you have a new font in your library. So now that we know all about font family, let's now talk about font size. So what you have seen currently is that I'm actually styling this with the help of pixels. All right, so 50 pixels. But what happens is that in real world environments, no one actually uses styling with pixels. All right, because pixels are something which can be seen as hard coded sizing. All right, so it's actually hard coded sizing. So what this means is that if you actually style something with pixels and it actually looks good on your viewport, but if you actually just open that website on your, let's say, mobile phone or tablet, which actually has a different viewport size, then the whole website would actually break. All right, so every element would be going all over the place. The styling would be a whole mess and everything won't look the same as it looked on your viewport. All right, so I would strictly recommend not to use pixels, but as we are actually just beginning to learn the units of CSS, and pixels is a good way to start that, because that's how I learned it. I created my beginner level websites by hard coding sizes. I learned it the hard way. All right, and I don't want you guys to go through that harsh road. All right, I want you guys to have a nice smooth highway path to your first software development job. All right, so what we'll do is that we are actually just going to style this with different kind of styling. All right, so we are actually just going to give it, let's say, 2rem. All right, so as you can see that the size of this how to style fonts actually changed. All right, but what is this rem? All right, so rem is basically a different kind of unit inside of CSS. All right, so with the help of rem, you actually style that font with respect to an HTML element. All right, and there is also a different kind of unit which is called an m, and this would actually size your element with respect to its parent. I know all this stuff sounds quite complicated at first, and also we would be going through all the units of CSS later on in this course. So for now, let's just limit ourselves to pixels. All right, so let's just define it as 50 pixels and move on. But I just wanted to clear this point that pixels are not the way to go, and there are some other ways with which you can actually define your sizes and with respect to different things inside of CSS. All right, which would actually make your life much easier when you're actually creating responsive websites. But for now, let's just hard code the sizes. All right. Alright, so now we know font family, font size. Now let's look at font weight. Alright, so as you can see that I've actually written font weight, and VS Code is actually giving me a number of recommendations of how I can actually define my font weight. Alright, so as you can see that I actually told you before that you can actually also specify some value inside of font weight. So you can actually specify 100, 200, 300, 400, and you just saw regular 400 in our Google fonts when we actually searched for this Cab Lamo font. So for now, what we'll actually do is that let's go ahead and give a bold font weight to this specific font. So now as you can see that now our font is actually in bold. All right, and this is the same thing that happens when you actually bold a font inside a Word document. All right, and the other values that were actually there, the 100, 200, 400, are actually lesser values than bold. All right. So bold is the maximum bold that you can reach, if you get what I'm saying, and 100 is the least amount of bold that you actually get, that you can actually specify for font weight. All right, so that's what happens when you actually style a font with font weight. All right, so if you guys remember and have actually worked with a Word document, so you guys already know that you can bold a font, you can select a font, and you can also turn that font into an italic font. All right, so how to do that in CSS? So that's what font style is for. All right, so you can actually define a new CSS property, font style, and specify italic. So this will actually turn your font in italic. All right, so now if we actually go ahead and look at our website, you can actually see that the font is now actually in italic. So these are all the different CSS properties specific to font that you can actually use to style your font. There are also a couple of other properties that are actually attached to font, and you can actually go ahead and venture out with those on your own free time. I would actually recommend to do that, because that would actually develop some trial and error habit inside of yourself, which is really needed if you're working with a full stack development environment. So for now, let's just go with these font properties, and now let's move on and actually apply some color properties to our font. So there are actually three different ways to specify colors in CSS, and I guess you have actually seen all the three ways in the previous videos. But let's go ahead and actually recall all of them quickly. All right. So the first one is just writing the name of the color. All right. So color aqua. All right. So this would actually turn your font in the color of aqua, as you can see on my website. So this is the first way with which you can actually define colors. The second one is actually defining it with RGB. Alright, so as you can see that I've actually written color and then I've specified RGB. And currently the default values that were given by VS Code were red, green, blue, and it would actually show up as black. Alright, because it's the combination of all the values. Alright. But instead of red, green, blue, what you can actually do is that you can also change the numbers. So instead of actually specifying red, green, blue, you can also specify different values for it. Alright, so as you can see that I've actually given different values for it. So you can actually see that it's 23, 46, 200. So what are these values? These are actually the different values of the three RGBs. Alright, so the first one is actually that I've actually given a 23 value to red, 46 value to green, and 200 value to blue. So overall, this is somewhat a blue color. So if you don't know how to specify RGB values and don't know what RGB is, so you can understand it this way. So let's say you were given three colors, alright, red, blue, green. So you can actually go ahead and mix them and create different colors out of those three values. And you also know that these three colors are the primary colors with which any color can be created. Alright. So the thing is that the range for each color in RGB is from 0 to 255. Alright. So if you actually specify 0, it's completely black. And if you specify 255, it's that specific color. So for red, on 0, it would actually appear as black. And in 255, it would actually appear as completely red. And if you go ahead and somewhere in between, let's say halfway there, so it would appear as dark red. Alright. So that's what I've done here. So we have actually taken somewhat close to black of both the values of red and green and actually specified a large value for blue. And ultimately mixing these three, we are actually getting somewhat close to blue color. Alright. And for your ease, so that you don't have to tweak with these numbers, VS Code actually provides you this little box here. Alright. And if you actually hover over here, it would actually open the color selector for you. Alright. And in here, you can actually alter the values with the help of your mouse pointer. Alright, and this would actually alter the RGB values for you. If you can actually see just above the color selector right here, it's actually altering the values for you. And this here is the bar with which you can actually change the hue of the color. So you can actually change it to red and then choose any specific range in red that you want. And other than RGB, there is something called RGBA. Alright, which is also known as attaching an opacity to that specific color. Alright, so you can actually go ahead and select this another bar that's down here. And if you actually drag it down, this is the opacity of that color. So you drag that down, the opacity goes down. So a new value would actually appear here in the RGB format. And the RGB would actually change to RGBA. Alright. So this is a color with opacity attached to it. So what does opacity do? I mean, I guess it's a simple Google search, but if you go ahead and actually save that, you can actually see it for yourself what opacity is actually doing. All right. So you can actually see through that font. All right. So if I actually currently apply some color to the background, you would actually see some color of the background through that font. All right. That's the opacity. How opaque is that color? So this was the second way, alright, the RGB and the RGBA way. Now the third way is actually defining a hex value for it, alright. Now this I consider to be one of the easiest ways to define colors inside of CSS, because you don't need to go into the hustle of writing RGBA and then specifying 4 values. You can just go ahead and write hash and specify any value. And then go ahead hover on to this little box and the color selector actually opens up. And this is actually the same color selector that you get for RGB and RGBA. And then you can actually go ahead, pick the color that you want, and then it would change the hex value accordingly. Alright. But just for your information, so that you actually know what hex values are. So as you can see that there are 6 hexadecimal values defined for this specific hex code. Alright. So the first two are actually for red, the next two are actually for green, and the last two are actually for red. So quite similar to RGB. All right. And if you actually also go ahead and attach an opacity to it, so what it would do is that it would actually attach another two values to it, and that would actually be known as the opacity for that specific hex code. All right. So that's how hex code actually works. All right, so this is one of the easiest ways with which you can actually define colors, because this is actually quite neat. It looks quite neat because you don't actually get quite good colors by just writing their names, and there aren't quite many of those. So to specify custom colors, this is one of the best ways to go. All right, so now that we know how to style fonts, how to style colors, so in the next video, we are actually going to see how to style borders and how margin and padding works. So all that we are actually going to do in the next one. So until then, keep chilling at the Code Cove.